Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast show. And I'm talking to another industry leader, the owner and founder of Produce Your Podcast, a marketing agency, Tracy DeForge. And we're going to be talking about sponsorships and that it is not only applicable to those big stars and famous podcasts, that it can be done and you can monetize your podcast in a bigger way. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here. If this conversation is going to be anything like what we had in the green room, it's going to be amazing.
Good. Awesome. Love it. And I love to see another woman in the podcasting industry. I'm always curious on how people get into the podcasting industry because everyone has such a different journey. So how did you get into it?
Well, my journey actually starts with a Journey to There, which is the first podcast that I ever hosted. And if you go back prior to that, I have a very extensive background in broadcast radio on the sales and marketing and production side. So I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and I was very inspired to start my own podcast back in 2015, which was Journey to There. And at the time, there were no full service production and marketing agencies like Produce Your Podcast. And so I needed to create one. I knew too much about broadcast quality production, and I really wanted my show to be the same level and quality as a broadcast radio show. And I knew I needed a team to do that. So I launched Journey to There in 2016. And then swiftly after that, as being a consultant, working with thousands of women entrepreneurs, starting businesses, doing business consulting for Fortune 500 companies, I knew intuitively that there was going to be a big market of business owners, coaches, consultants, authors, financial advisors, you name it, who were going to want to have a podcast as a means to grow the revenue for their business, but they didn't want to have to manage all of the details themselves.
Yeah.
And I created Produce Your Podcast very swiftly after I launched my very first podcast. So that is the history of how it all began.
Yeah, I love that. That was sort of similar to me. I did mine, and then someone's like, can you do that for me? And it's funny how that starts. But of course, I got out of the production part of it. It is a lot of moving pieces, right? There's so much. And even just in podcasting in general, it's like, yeah, you record, but there's the production, the content marketing, the coordination, the networking, and then if you're looking to monetize, it's like, as an entrepreneur, it's like there's only so much time you have to learn all those things.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And we see quite often, especially, so Produce Your Podcast was actually started as a virtual remote recording company prior to the pandemic. Before there was a Riverside or a Squadcast or people were jumping on Zoom as a regular part of their day, we actually honed a technology out of the UK to be able to record our clients virtually anywhere in the world. That was one of our pioneering opportunities in the space. Then we saw a lot of businesses launch podcasts during the pandemic out of sheer need and just because podcasting was having such a resurgence at that time and people had more time on their hands maybe at that point in time. And since then, post-pandemic, we've actually had a lot of people gravitate to the full service production model because they didn't know what they didn't know. Yeah. And then once they knew it, they didn't want to do it again. So it's really been an interesting pathway in podcasting for me as the founder and CEO of Produce Your Podcast, as well as since then, I also co-founded the Podcast Professionals Association, which is the industry's only 501c6 nonprofit organization for podcast service professionals like yourself and myself. And so that's been really amazing to be actually come together as an industry to be able to support each other, supporting podcasters.
Yeah. I love that. I did not know that before I met you, Tracy.
Well, now you do.
I know. I'm going to have to check that out. So let's get to helping the audience here. So, of course, everyone is looking to monetize their branded podcast, but sponsorship and that whole monetization advertising, even for me, honestly, it feels like a daunting task, and it feels like that it's not doable unless you've got 10,000 downloads. Like, what are some of those misconceptions? Because there's ideas all over the place.
Yeah, so this is actually one of my most favorite things to talk about because I'm initially on a mission to bust up the myth about the fact that you can't monetize your show with smaller audiences. You can't monetize your show with niche audiences. And absolutely, if you have that combination, that's actually a really good foundation to monetize your show. So smaller audiences and niche focused audiences, businesses, branded podcasts, for example, have a really amazing opportunity to monetize their shows in a couple of ways. So when you very first start looking at it, the first thing you want to think about is your podcast for your business is your oceanfront real estate. So the first step in monetizing your show is to really take the opportunity to market your own products and services inside your own podcast, because no one's going to sell your services better than you're going to sell them. And you can do that with the opportunity of starting to integrate messaging and information around your own products and services attached to the content inside your show. So I think even if we back up from that and go the 10,000 foot view, not the 10,000 download view, but the 10,000 foot view, is that your podcast is serving a very mighty and engaged audience. And whether or not that's 150 to 350 people, whether that's 1,000 to 1,500 people, or 3,000, 5,000 and on up, you are attracting an audience of people who are showing up for you. They're consuming your content. They're sharing your content. And there are businesses and brands out there that want to get involved with those quality audiences. So you just have to think, it is my audience. I have a quality audience, maybe over the quantity of my audience. If you can overcome that myth first and foremost, and even more than a myth, maybe a mindset, because I think people feel discouraged or disappointed or maybe even overwhelmed thinking I have to wait to monetize my show.
Yes.
And I actually had a conversation with a potential, we obviously do a lot of business development to bring on new clients. And I had an opportunity to have a consult call with a client yesterday. And she was telling me she had a podcast. She was rebranding it. She was tired of doing things on her own, just a lot like we just shared before. And that she hadn't planned to be able to monetize it. She was going to relaunch it in October. And she said, by 2026, I should be able to monetize it. And I was like, oh, no. Hold on just a second. I was like, you don't have to wait another 2 years to monetize your show. And I think it's like the mindset around that growth trajectory and having to wait is probably one of the things that I really, if anyone takes, if you're listening to the show right now, what I want you to take away from it is really you can start to monetize your show with brands and partnerships and advertising at any size audience or even pre-launch. There's just certain strategies and formulas of ways to do that.
Yeah, I love that because it feels really daunting. And I think sponsorship too, even just the idea of approaching other companies and brands to ask for the sponsorship, it's so easy to feel that imposter syndrome. Like, who am I? What are they going to want from me? So how do you know when you're ready?
Yeah. So what you're really actually talking about too, I think, is that anybody who has never done anything always has some trepidation, some fear, some overwhelm. And most podcast hosts, like for example, if you're a financial advisor and you're hosting a podcast to be a subject matter expert in thought leadership around financing, real estate planning, estate planning, talking the language of a brand, talking to a marketing director at a brand or talking to somebody, like that's out of your typical wheelhouse. So that's going to feel uncomfortable. So I think the first thing you have to do is kind of set yourself up to know this is going to maybe feel a little awkward for me.
Yeah.
So I recommend in those cases that you start having conversations with people that already know of you, know the quality of your work, the brands that are already listening to your shows, and really think through those conversations that you starting with your warm network first. And that's where we've seen a lot of success. So for example, this is not limited to just people who have broad regional, national, international audiences either. This is a scenario for like a divorce attorney, for example. We have had success with PR agencies whose main audience is in the Connecticut Northeast area. That's where their client bases are. Interior designers who get the majority of their businesses with local brick and mortar, local clients in the Atlanta, Georgia market. So you have to just start thinking about who is in your backyard, who is in the footprint of your audience, or who are vendors that you already work with. Like, a great example of that would be the interior designers, for example. They have been possibly in business for years. If you are a service-based business, for example, think of how long you've been in business and how many vendors you've worked with over the years, right? So you buy from Kohler, you utilize different wallpaper companies, different fabric companies. You've been providing them business for a really long time. They know that you are going to deliver a quality product to the audience, and that audience is likely going to want to purchase that product, right? So that's the mentality that you have to start. And I really believe that the power of those conversations and the confidence that comes from them is just starting with the relationships that already exist for you, because they're easier conversations to have.
Yeah. And it's just like podcasting. When you first do your own show or you guest on a podcast for the first time, like it feels awkward. You're worried, you're scared. It's like it gets better.
Yes, it does. And it also becomes it's like a muscle, or it's like when you very first start a workout, like it's not going to be easy, and accepting that, and that it might feel awkward, or you may not get the first call, right? Like, don't let that stop you from making that first call. I think one of the biggest tips and things that I can share is that, you really want to start where you are. And if where you are is a smaller audience, then start looking at the other things that you can build in for the value of someone who might be aligned with your audience, or a brand that might want to get in touch with your audience. So look at, do you also upload your podcast to your website? And so can you include them in your show notes? Can you include them in additional social media that you have? What is your social media following? Are you sending out a newsletter? And by the way, podcasters, if you're not sending out a newsletter, if you start with one subscriber, start that today. However, like, those are the things you want to think about. Where can I bring value to these businesses? And even locally, I had an opportunity to talk to a podcaster whose audience are high net worth individuals. So they have a small but very engaged, passionate audience. And when I say small, I am talking typically of 1,000, 1,500 downloads or less, because I get asked that a lot. Like, how do you define a small audience? In some cases, 350 or less. But because that audience, the quality of that audience has very high net worth, then they're able to tap into car dealerships. They're able to tap into luxury brands. And it doesn't take a lot of conversions for the people who align with the shows to see results.
I have a question for you. Do you find that when people hear a podcast that has a sponsor, do people feel like, oh, they must be a good podcast? Like, does it up level the credibility of the podcast, do you think? Or, because I've heard both views, right? Like, some are like, oh, they've got ads. But then on the other hand, you think like, ooh, they've got sponsors. Like, it can go both ways. Do you like, what are you hearing out there?
So there's two ways for me to answer that question. The first is that there's a lot of buzz happening in the industry right now around what they're calling heavy ad load. So if you listen to a podcast, for example, that's on a Lemonada or on a Dear Media Network, David Duchovny's Fail Better podcast is a really good example. The ad load inside that podcast, and it's a fantastic podcast, by the way, because he is so raw and real and talks about failure, and just, there's so many amazing guests that he has. But inside that show, there are almost as many live read / commercials as a radio stop set would have. So they're back to back, and that's considered a really heavy ad load when you have live read after live read, or recorded commercial after recorded commercial. It's very much mirrored in the way that radio monetized and has monetized for decades. And that's like a blessing and a curse, right? So that network, that podcaster, he's grossing a lot of revenues off of his show, but it's disruptive to the listener experience. And it's a lot of the reasons why people left broadcast radio and moved to podcasting to get away from those stop sets. So with an audience that when you're trying to build the audience for your podcast, yes, there's going to be some good cachet associated with having a sponsor in your show. But what's even more important is the strategy of how you're integrating that sponsor into your podcast. Right. So we work and coach a lot of brands, podcasting, branded podcast, business focused podcasts. We coach them through this because in order to build an audience, you don't want to alienate them by having a lot of commercials, right? Yeah. Or live reads. But in order to monetize your show, you've got to stop down to bring in a brand. So we have, and I'll just kind of give a couple of our secrets away here. We encourage you to start with, if you're starting to build your sponsorship formula, start with what we called the powered by sponsor. Some people might say it's the arena rights model. It's if you are in your community and it's the Verizon Wireless Amphitheater or the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it's the naming of your podcast studio. And your studio can be your office, it can be your closet, it can be if you go to a co-working space and you use their offices, like it doesn't matter where your studios are. It's the fact that you are opening up your podcast for a brand to be aligned with you in a way that's brought, instead of like owning the name of your show, which you never want to cannibalize and sell the name of your show by having a title sponsorship, but it can be the name of your show powered by the brand. And so you could start with that and never dilute the integrity of your content in any way, shape, or form. You can add to that by saying, every time I open the mic and I start a show, it's powered by, but I'll also 20 minutes in do a live read for you, and you'll be included in my social media and in my show notes and all of the other things. So if you can start there, a lot of times that package for sponsorship, based on what your cost you're incurring for production and to create and produce your show, can often be offset by just that one sponsor.
Wow.
And so that you're having the monetization, you're having the cachet of having a sponsor inside your show, but you're not having ad read after ad read after ad read, which is what is called the cost per thousand model. So we talk a lot about anti-cost per thousand model because the cost per thousand model typically is associated with 10,000 downloads or more. Yeah. And so if you're 9,999 or less, you can directly monetize your show and have a better listening experience and still put money to your bottom line.
I love that. And that is such a great idea. I've never quite thought of it that way. And it's nice to find that there is a balance, it's not one or the other.
Yes. And I think one of the things too that is really smart is to then take that powered by sponsorship, get your production costs covered with that sponsor. We recommend that those are 6 or 12-month agreements, no less than 13 weeks, or which is 90 days, because you don't want to in any way disrupt the integrity of your show without enough of a return on the investment to be worth it to. I mean, you are literally providing access to an audience that they can't otherwise reach. And that's where the confidence factor comes in. Right. We get you may not ask me this question, but we get asked a lot, well, what about affiliate relationships? A lot of times I'll have a conversation with a brand.
I was going to ask you that.
Oh, you were going to ask me that. Well,
it's up here.
Great minds think alike. And what we say is that to only take an affiliate relationship is really actually doing a disservice to you and to your audience. You can put an affiliate link in your show notes. Sure, that's fine. But you have an audience that if they feel is attractive enough to want to be involved with, then you don't want to give up, again, any of that oceanfront real estate for the idea that it might make you money, right? So you can have that conversation with them that says, I'd be happy to support an affiliate link in addition to bringing you into my audience and introducing you to my audience. But that is very valuable content and very valuable access that warrants a more significant investment than just the possibility of us both having someone click on a link. And again, it's just the way you position it, right?
Yeah, that is great insight. Because yeah, when you think about it, the amount that you're going to get from that affiliate link is like peanuts compared to, what is possible. And then also having a relationship with that vendor versus passively using an affiliate link. I mean, it holds more value.
Yes, it definitely does. And I think the value component is where you have to really own and claim. And that confidence is going to come through in those conversations. So that's why I encourage you to start those conversations with somebody you already know or have a business relationship with, and just see what kind of questions they ask you. And of course, I'm not saying to detour around the conversation around downloads. It's just all about how you have the conversation about
Yeah.
downloads. So if someone is specifically saying, okay, well, what are your downloads? You can say, here are my downloads on the podcast. Keep in mind that my podcast is very nichely targeted specifically to people who would be interested in buying a car from you, or buying a faucet from you, or the brand awareness that you can achieve by being repetitively in front of my small but mighty engaged audience is very much more valuable than you going wide across several audiences that may or may not be as highly targeted to your product or service as my audience will be. So if you have, like,
Positioning.
literally, if you just kind of practice that over and over
Yeah.
again, it's not really even about the downloads anymore. It's about the quality of the people they can get in front of and have a conversation with. And that's where it becomes a win-win-win for the audience, for the host, and for the advertiser or sponsor.
That is so good. Often it's like your confidence and just even knowing what to say will help bring you that confidence, but will also help, close that deal a little bit more. Now, I know you coach and consult people with the sponsorship programs that you have. I've never seen that out there. It's either you pay, a company to like do it for you, but to be able to be taught the strategies and create a plan for yourself. I mean, like, that is so valuable. Can you touch upon your programs, just because I want people to understand that there is help out there?
Yes, thank you so much for acknowledging that. I recently facilitated a workshop for SiriusXM, who owns a podcast hosting platform called Simplecast. And I talked a lot about what we've talked about on this podcast today. And people came up to me afterwards, and I'm not exaggerating when they say, this was such a game changer for me. Nobody is talking about this the way that you're talking about it. I've never even heard this information before. And that is so validating for me, because I do feel like it's very purposeful work. Because
Yeah.
my opinion is that your voice matters, and you start a podcast because you have something to say, and your audience is responding to that because they are engaged and vibrantly excited and enthusiastic and showing up for you based on what it is that you have to say. But there has to be an economic ecosystem that supports everybody, because it's not an inexpensive, whether you're doing it yourself or you're
Yeah.
using a full service agency, there's still hard costs involved. So people have the right to monetize their shows without having to wait. So that's my soapbox. I'm
Yes.
so excited that you recognize that. And what we do through our program, through Produce Your Podcast, is called the Sponsorship Circle. And we have two options. So we do a small cohort, which might be, 7 to 10 max people in this cohort. And everybody's coming in and they're benefiting from hearing other people's questions. And we are guiding them through everything from the templates of the packages, how to price their packages, how to integrate special segments into their format that can be sponsored. What is that tier? Like, we started out like starting with the powered by, then what comes next after that, what comes next after that, to maintain that integrity of the content of your show. I mean, we literally go through all the nuts and bolts, even financial modeling, to help you price out your packages and sustain them. And then all the way down into, like, we will literally help review your email pitches. We had
Oh, wow.
we have had the amount of success has been so exciting. And these are all smaller audience focused podcasts. The Outdoor Biz podcast sold out all of their sponsorships because they were able to literally, they would send us an email pitch, what should we do here? What should we do there? And we will help them, craft the email. And it's just a very tactical program. It's not fluffy. It's like, here's a template of a package. Here's how you can craft this. And then when you come on the live calls, which we have once a month, then you get to ask questions and we even help you target the businesses that you should talk to. So back to that Outdoor Biz podcast, for example, and this happens a lot with people thinking about sponsorships. They're like, Outdoor Biz, I'm going to go for Patagonia in North Face and I'm going to get them on. And okay, you could, but what about those boutique surfboards and hiking boots and the smaller locally, not even locally owned, but what about the startups that have founders or people that you can actually get in touch with via LinkedIn versus going through 10 levels of red tape to get to the person. And so that's a specific example of the Outdoor Biz. He was able to monetize a really boutique hiking boot manufacturing company. And the same with the PR Maven podcast that I was referencing earlier. I mean, she was able, because she's so locally focused, she was actually able to bring in one of her clients that she's worked so successfully with, which she was able to convert her client into a sponsor of her podcast because they were such a big advocate for the work that she did. So all of these are just examples of the kind of tactical support that you get. But I also like to share the success stories because if you're connecting with this type of messaging or this type of formula, then that just lets you know that it can work for you.
And what the possibilities are. So it's like you don't know what you don't know. You don't see what the possibilities are and then once someone tells you, you're like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that?
And we've even helped people that when they are coming through the sponsorship circle, they might be getting ready to go to a conference, for example. We had a podcast called Berry Nation where her whole team was going to a bariatric focused conference where they were going to have a lot of the healthcare and medical equipment, and just the conference itself with the expo hall was like a den of possibility for potential sponsors. And so one of the things that we worked with them on, just to show you that it is a small group facilitation, but it's so one-on-one inside of that. So we were able to help coach them through how to network at the conference, how to have the conversations with the people at the expo booth so that they could introduce their show to people right on the spot who could possibly be making a decision. So it covers all the spectrums of talking to someone in your local backyard, all the way up to talking to a national, regional, national brand.
Love it. Now, I think part of the myth or the mystique around it, I think too, is understanding what the sponsors are looking for. And I'm assuming that understanding that helps you frame and position the pitch to help it be a yes. What are some of the things that sponsors do look for?
Right. So I've probably used the word visibility and access multiple times in our conversation today, because that truly is what they are looking for. So if you have a quality audience that is showing up for you repeatedly, you have to think about what it would be like if you had the opportunity. Think of yourself, first of all, put yourself in the brand's perspective. So you're walking in their shoes. And if you were connected to someone, and we'll just use the Berry Nation example as to walk that one all the way through. So the Berry Nation podcast is focused on individuals who either are going to have a bariatric surgery or have had one. So there are very certain nuances that happen to a patient when they decide to have that surgery and post-surgery and sustaining the weight loss. So there are very specific certain protein shakes that the community that podcast also has a membership community associated with it. So access, that is so important. So what that audience is looking for, because you always want to think about what's in it for the audience first. If you come at it the other way, you're going to miss the mark. So what's in it for the audience is that they want to be connected with quality vetted products and services. They want to understand the psychological implications of what's happening to them, not just the weight
Mhm.
loss, but all the other things that happen around that. So when you're thinking about what's in it for your audience, then you can think about, okay, what kind of brands would want to connect with my audience? So then
Yeah.
you start thinking about the protein shakes, the vitamin supplements. One of the craziest but most positive, like really interesting things that came out of that sponsorship circle working with them is travel, because a lot of people don't think about when they are in a capacity of being overweight or dealing with obesity, they're not as comfortable traveling. It's not comfortable in the plane seats. It's not
Yeah.
comfortable walking. It's not comfortable doing the tours. So what better way to reintroduce something that a new patient who's lost a lot of weight could get very excited about traveling. So they might be having conversations with tourism
Mm.
and visitors bureaus. Like these are the kind of things that you gotta go outside the box. But what
Yeah.
that brand would want is they would want to market like travel friendly options for bariatric patients. Like they're not really necessarily different options than maybe someone who doesn't struggle with obesity, but it's how it's framed to the audience.
Yeah,
And
so true.
so getting that target messaging, having it align that win-win-win. So it's visibility, it's access, and it's value to the audience, because if the audience is seeing the value, 73% of people surveyed by Edison Research said that they would take action on a product or service that was recommended by the host in the show.
Mm.
Doesn't take a lot of
Yeah.
numbers to convert 73% of someone to a product or service.
And those stats are amazing.
They're
And I
phenomenal.
know it blows my mind. And it's because of that trust factor, right? Like you feel like you're in this inner circle and you're having this private conversation. You're listening in, you hear them every week. So of course, whatever product they say or share, like you just automatically have that element of trust. So for a sponsor to be able to tap into an ideal client where that trust is already there,
Oh,
that's
absolutely. Because,
amazing.
like, for example, with the Berry Nation podcast, their hosts have all had the surgery, right? So
Yeah.
they're like first person talking
Yeah.
about their experience. Plus, they're talking to experts that are helping with that process. They're bringing and talking to members and patients that have had. So there's so much richness and robust credibility and integrity in that content that it's almost like, why wouldn't
Yeah.
someone want
Yeah.
to be at that point? It's like the no-brainer. It's not like if you should have the conversation, it's how many
Yes.
conversations do you need to have before someone says yes?
Yeah. I know. And even so I honestly feel this way. Someone listening into our conversation right now, I think they're going to feel more confident in approaching the situation, just hearing how you're positioning it. And it's just that changing that mindset, right? Like it's so powerful.
I so hope so, because honestly, I am a majorly passionate advocate for helping anybody get their show monetized so that
Yeah,
they can continue to put their voice out into the world.
absolutely. One last question, because I know this plays a big piece of it, is expectations and goals. Because some people think that, oh, I'm going to monetize the show and get rich fast. Or to me, I'm like, that is not realistic. What are realistic goals and expectations?
Yeah, so I think that you have to start with what your why is, and uh, everyone's expectations are going to be in association with what their why is. So if your why for sponsorship. So at this point in time, I almost always, hands down, always talk about the why being what's in it for the audience, because that's where you always have to start with your mindset when you're bringing in sponsors, when you're bringing
Yeah.
in guests. You always think about what's in it for them. When you're thinking about expectations around monetization, you really want to think about, again, how much visibility in terms of outside of the podcast. So if you have those smaller audience numbers that we talked about earlier, you're going to need to be able to provide them exposure in other areas outside of just the podcast. That's going to be a critical point. Secondarily, if you don't have that, perhaps have that big audience, and big meaning, we're talking about, if you're a local business, big is relative, right? So that's
Mhm.
that's another thing. So but having those realistic expectations, if you have a cumulative opportunity between blog posts, show notes, social media posts, newsletter, vertical reels, branding on vertical reels, branding on audiogram graphics, presence inside the show attached to special segments. Like these are all the things that we teach. But so you get that piece solid first. And then if those numbers are still relatively small, but again, think quality over quantity, then you have the opportunity to bring in guests as perhaps maybe as a special bonus episode or part of your content, as long as it's, again, aligned with your audience. Is it somebody that the audience would find value in? And so you can incorporate, not sell your guest appearances, because I'm not an advocate of that at all, but I am an advocate of bundling the visibility of having a guest appearance, being in all the other social media and other external marketing formats, and then the show itself. So then that gives you a way to bump up the price a little bit more. And then if you have the third piece of the expectations getting aligned is setting up what is the call to action that's going to support the brand. So are they going to use a specific promo code, for example?
Right.
We worked with the NHL Wraparound podcast pre-launch. Now, I also want to say for everybody that well, they're the NHL, of course. No, this was an independent podcast, 2 hosts that worked in the industry and were passionate about the hockey business, but they were not affiliated with the NHL. They're local hosts, just like you and me.
Yeah.
With a very, very strong network in the hockey space. They launched their podcast pre-launch, no audience. They were able to launch with over $28,000 in sponsorship based on their warm network, of which we coached them through 100% warm network relationships, launched with over $28,000 in sponsorship. And the first person, because we talk our talk and walk our walk, the first sponsorship they secured was the Powered by sponsorship. That person committed for 6 months. They used a promo code and this is game worn jerseys, which are very expensive. I've learned a lot about this.
They are.
They're very expensive. So we're talking about a very niche audience with a very niche budget to be able to have the interest and afford a previously game worn jersey, authenticated. That client generated over $17,000 in sales from the WRAP 10 promo code. So it's
the
magical.
Possibilities are there.
Yes, it's magical, but those are hard numbers.
Yeah.
Those are hard numbers of a pre-launch show with a person with a really good network in the industry and a client that had a warm relationship that was willing to take a chance and made multiple figures back of the investment that they spent. And if that's how we wrap today, that's like the pinnacle. I almost feel inclined to say those results are not typical text, tag, and title, but I don't want to say that, because they can be typical if the strategy is right, the formula is right, and the network is right. And so, all the things that we talked about today kind of lead up to that success story, because they implemented every layer of those tiers of recommendations very succinctly and very directly.
Damn. Kudos to you, lady. That's
kudos
awesome.
to them. I mean, yes, we love the humble brag about it, but kudos to them, because they were teachable, they were coachable, they took our suggestion, they took action, and it worked.
Yeah. I love hearing those stories. It gives me goosebumps.
Me too.
Then, and just to even hear those stories and be like, okay, it is possible. Like, it's half the battle.
It is. It absolutely is.
Such great strategies. I love hearing this. Now, I know also you have, you did a workshop recently. I don't know if you have more coming up, but you have a video series as well, so people can understand your 5-figure podcast sponsorship plan. And how can people get more resources and tips from you, Tracy?
Yeah. So produceyourpodcast.com is basically the very best way to connect with me, to connect with all of our resources. We have, not only do we have a portfolio of amazing shows that you can sample and check out, and you can even listen to, like, you can actually listen to the NHL Wraparound show and hear how the sponsors were integrated into the show, which is a smart thing to do if you want to kind of take everything we said today and then connect the dots on how it actually comes and sounds. I would recommend you doing that. But the website itself is just a wealth of resources. There's a lot of blog posts. There's an opt-in that you should likely get when you go on producerpodcast.com that will have you sign up for the 5-figure sponsorship formula, and you will get the video series and all of the things that we talked about here, but in much more detail. And there's a growth tab on our website that talks about a lot of different audience growth opportunities. So, and you can just connect and schedule a call. There's absolutely, it's not a sales pitch, as I hope you've picked up from me today. I'm really all about being a resource and a pathway to people to profit from their shows.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad I invited you onto the show. Such a great topic. And yeah, I just appreciate you so much.
Well, and you know what? I want to share, and thank you for saying that, but this is a great example for everybody who said, okay, yeah, but she knows this stuff. She knows this stuff. But we just reached out to you on a LinkedIn. We didn't have a current relationship. We took a chance, wanting to know if it'd be something that you would be interested in knowing more about, which connected us personally, which then led to you inviting me to be on your show, which is now we've been able to educate your audience. So let's leave that with an actionable takeaway. If you're listening to this right now, send one message to one person. Just start the conversation today, because you absolutely have no idea where it could go.
I agree. And I love LinkedIn for that, because I feel like people are more open to having those conversations, whether they're chatting, texting, getting engaged, making those connections, or, someone that I could connect with, or that's how you propel your business forward. That's how you learn new things and what's possible for you. Thanks for reaching out.
Thank you. And if someone doesn't respond, there are many other fish in the sea. Just keep sending the messages.
I know. Perfect. So I hope people reach out to you. You are a wealth of knowledge, my friend. And I just appreciate you being on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and look forward to continued conversations we can share with you and your audience.
Absolutely. All right. So that's a wrap, folks. And I will see you next week on the Leverage Your Podcast show.